Thank you for tuning in to the Cannabis Currency podcast, sponsored by publiclytradedpodcasts.com. Cannabis Currency provides companies an outlet to share valuable information with a focus on CBD, hemp, and cannabis markets. From testing laboratories to full-scale hemp farming, agricultural, nutraceutical, and pharmaceutical development and production, ancillary businesses and consultants, medicinal and recreational dispensaries, oils, edibles, infused beverages, and more. Cannabis Currency brings to the forefront publicly traded companies on the cutting edge to help heighten your awareness in an ever-expanding market. Here's your host, Marcus Heatherly.
On today's episode of Cannabis Currency, we're excited to spotlight Emerald Health Therapeutics Inc. They're a Canadian-based company trading on the TSX Venture under the ticker symbol EMH. You can also find them in the States on the OTCQX under the ticker symbol EMHTF. Emerald Health Therapeutics is a licensed producer in Canada. They produce and sell dried cannabis and cannabis oil for medical and recreational purposes. Emerald is a vertically integrated seed-to-sale enterprise with decades of experience in pharmaceutical innovation. They're focused on developing value-added cannabis products with potential wellness and medical benefits. Today, we're excited to have their CFO, Mr. Rob Hill. Mr. Hill, welcome to Cannabis Currency.
Thanks, Marcus. Nice to be here.
Mr. Hill brings his years of experience in technology, finance, and business development. He has an expertise in managing enterprise compliance and risk, and he brings a wealth of knowledge from helping Fortune 500 company CEOs. Mr. Hill, if you could please tell myself and Cannabis Currency listeners a little bit about you and give us a brief history of Emerald Health Therapeutics, Inc.
Sure. I'm originally a science guy, and in fact, I studied science at university, and I worked in science studying viruses for a few years before I decided to change paths and get into the world of finance. And so about 25 years ago, I started working for companies in technology and advancing the companies from a finance perspective. So I've worked and run companies in the USA, in Japan, and here I am now in Canada. And so that's a little bit of a history. I think the most interesting part of my background actually is that I'm the son of a cop here in Canada. And so growing up in my household, cannabis was absolutely taboo, and it would be, as far as my dad was concerned, on par with manslaughter or whatever if I was ever caught smoking cannabis. Mm-hmm. So for me to get into this business is a bit of a surprise. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, or if you told me that I was going to become the CFO of a fairly large cannabis company, I would have thought you were crazy. But I met a fellow, a guy that I've known for many years, who invited me to talk to him about Emerald, and he told me what they were up to as far as developing cannabis-based therapeutics that seemed to be quite effective in helping medical patients across Canada. And so over the course of a cup of coffee with this fellow, I stopped thinking about what my dad, the ex-cop, would think, and I started thinking more about what my mother, who had actually died a few years ago of cancer, and how the therapeutics that we were working on here at Emerald would have really helped her with pain management, helped her with sleep, helped her with anxiety, just dealing with being so sick, and a whole host of other things. And so I became very fascinated in both Emerald and more broadly cannabis. So here I am, and I'm with this company. It's a publicly traded company. You gave a lot of the important aspects of what we're up to as far as growing cannabis and selling cannabis across the country. But the way I would characterize Emerald overall is it's really a company run by a bunch of ex-scientists and people that have been involved in the development and bringing to market of drugs and therapeutic agents for many, many years. And so that's a big focus for us. And it's where we like to differentiate ourselves from other cannabis players in the market.
Got it. Well, you guys definitely bring your scientific expertise, and then knowing your personal background, I think that gives people an understanding of the dichotomy that you see sometimes in the cannabis market as people become more knowledgeable and aware of the therapies that cannabis and cannabinoids can provide. Let's go, if we could, Mr. Hill, into my first question, which is in regards to your recent joint venture with Pure Sunfarms. Can you tell us more about this large-scale, low-cost, high-quality production that you guys have going on in Delta, British Columbia?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Marcus. We've been in the business of selling and growing cannabis for 4 or 5 years now, but it was done out of a very small location in Victoria, British Columbia, here on the west coast of Canada. And, our production at that point was less than 100 kilograms a year or 200 pounds a year. So that was the situation when I joined the company about 21 months ago. But in anticipation of cannabis becoming legal for recreational use, as it has in about 10 or 11 states in the U.S. now, we knew as a company that we needed to get big. And so the avenue for going from growing in an area of just a few hundred square feet to something that would be commercially relevant in a new paradigm in Canada led us to partner up with a company called Village Farms. And Village Farms has been a producer in greenhouses of tomatoes mainly for many years, for 30 years. And they had a site in in Delta, just outside of Vancouver, which they'd been operating for 20 years growing tomato. And tomato growing in that environment had become kind of a low margin game. So they were looking for something that would increase their margins, and we were looking for something that would allow us to do what we knew, cannabis growing, on a much larger scale. So we went from growing in like a facility that was 3,000 square feet to one that's now in full production in Delta that's over 1 million square feet. So it's like growing cannabis in the equivalent of 19 football fields.
Wow.
It's an amazing facility. Anyone that I take there, I'm so proud to walk them around and show them what we've built in this joint venture between ourselves and Village Farms. And it's now fully planted out, effective last April. It was on time and on budget, and it's growing cannabis at a quality in terms of yield and production that exceeds our best case scenario when we were modeling it out in the early days. And as well, it's producing cannabis at a cost that is ahead of expectation, our best case scenario. So we're really happy with both the product that's coming out of the farm there, as well as the cost per gram to produce it, which we said from the beginning we thought would be less than $1 Canadian per gram to produce, so call it 75 cents. We've reached that point in much faster than we'd anticipated, so we couldn't be happier with how well that facility is going. So we were so happy that last March we announced that Pure Sunfarms was going to double its production area. So Pure Sunfarms is the name of this joint venture that we own 50-50 with Village Farms. So we're going to be increasing that from 1.1 million square feet that we currently have fully planted out. And by this time next year, we think we'll have another 1.1 million square feet fully planted out. So each one of those greenhouse structures will do, we think, north of 75,000 kilograms a year, or north of 150,000 pounds a year production.
Rob, let me ask you this. You mentioned the cost per gram as low as 75 cents per gram. Do you expect that to maintain that cost going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it could go lower, it could go higher, and it depends. Farming is there's things can go wrong in farming. You can get crop losses for various reasons, but and so we model, and when we announce to the public what we believe these facilities are going to do, it's kind of done on a risk-based, adjusted basis. So we say that it'll go less than $1 Canadian, and we think it could go lower from there for sure. But there's always risk when you talk about that because you never know what's going to happen.
Sure, no, and that's expected. I mean, you are talking about plants and they're growing, whether you have them in a contained or non-contained environment. It's still going to, like you said, dictate the ability for some loss to take place. Well, let's change the subject a little bit if we can, Mr. Hill. Exciting news recently out about your team. On July 30th, you guys announced your new CEO, Mr. Riaz Bandali. How do you expect his vision and experience to help the company going forward?
Yeah, that was really an exciting move for us. Emeralds, for a long time, we've had great cannabis people. It's been a strength for us. And we've had some very quick-thinking operations people that have done a great job of getting us from where we have been over the course of the last 5 years or so. But bringing a guy like Riaz in, he's going to help us really get to the next level because as a company, we have grown dramatically in terms of the production capability, in terms of the volume of cannabis that we're processing and the scale and scope of the business. my comment about Riaz, having now worked with him for the past couple of weeks, is he's very quantitative in the way he thinks about things, very analytical, and he's got a background. He also, like me, is a scientist in training at university, but he also made the jump into finance. So he's been running companies, large companies, or business units within large companies. So he really understands commercialization of products. He understands analytical testing, services, early stage global operations, et cetera. And so but he's bringing a real numerical focus to the business. And I think with his vision, along with a couple of the other additions that we've had to join me in the C-suite over the last couple of months, I think we're ready to really take this company from a really good performing small company to one that is going to make the jump into the mid to large company category in the coming year or two.
Emerald Health Therapeutics Inc. is the company that we're highlighting today. With us, we have their CFO, Mr. Rob Hill. We've been highlighting not only his technology and finance background, but as well as the science background, and many of the team members at Emerald Health have a science background. Mr. Hill, if you would talk about the recent detailed outline about your production and processing advancements that was listed in your August 6th press release. I noticed in there some information about large-scale CBD extraction and soft gel encapsulation. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure can. We talked about Pure Sunfarms and the joint venture and the ability to produce in large volumes. But really, we very much like CBD, which is a popular and well-known molecule that's produced in cannabis as well as hemp. And so we have taken steps to increase our ability to deal in that. So we planted 1,200 acres, or we have a contract with some farmers that are growing 1,200 acres of hemp for us, and that's a great supply of CBD. The question is, how do we process that, and how do we get the CBD out of the hemp? And vital to that is a relationship that we have with a company here in Canada known as the Factors R&D Technology Group. And they're a not a well-known company because they're private, but they people here in Canada and the U.S. and in many parts of the world actually are familiar with the brands and the products that they have been distributing. And so I think they are responsible for approximately half the natural health food products that get to market in Canada, supplements and whatnot. So they've got a long history in extracting bioactive compounds from plant material. So we're working on a strategic partnership with them to have them handle the hemp that we are growing right now. And they can extract the CBD from the hemp, and they will be they are equipped to produce up to 600 million soft gel capsules for us. So last week's announcement was really to update the market and the community interested in Emerald that this strategic partner of ours, Factors R&D Technology, is just preparing to submit the final evidence package to Health Canada. And Health Canada is the organization, the federally run organization that's responsible for licensing facilities that are going to be dealing with cannabinoid products like CBD. So all this is to say that facility that Factors R&D Technology has dedicated to us, we're anticipating being fully licensed and ready to crank through that hemp that we're growing and produce up to 600 million soft gel capsules for us starting later this year.
Great news. That's exciting to hear. Is there anything else that we didn't get to talk about today that you'd like to highlight for our Cannabis Currency listeners and your investors?
I think we covered it. We're working very hard. All the growth that we've done, everybody here is exhausted, but we're all it's the good kind of exhaustion that you get when you know you're working on something that is making progress.
Yes. And
we're moving forward. And what gets everybody here out of bed in the morning every day is just knowing that we're coming to market with products that we think are going to really advance and help people dealing with important health issues like insomnia, pain management, energy modulation, et cetera. So we're happy to talk with you guys and tell the story, and thanks so much for having us on the show today.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, Mr. Hill. It's been great having you to give us a detailed update on your company, Emerald Health Therapeutics. If you would come back on in the next 90 days or so and give us an update.
We'd love to.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye for now.
This audio interview was entirely sponsored and produced by Publicly Traded Podcasts, which is responsible for the content. The opinions and information provided in this audio interview are those of the guests and those of the respective companies that they represent, and do not necessarily reflect those of the team or management of Publicly Traded Podcasts. All listeners of this audio interview are encouraged to do their due diligence and research when planning and executing investment strategies. We strongly recommend seeking the assistance of an investment professional. The guests interviewed may have paid for an extended audio distribution package and are in no way affiliated with publicly traded podcasts or their audio distribution partners.